Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I will give everyone a moment to join, and there will be some messages in the chat. And, to, and then we will do a little bit of a icebreaker to get things started. Feel free to say hi and where you're from and all of those things. We will be recording this session so you can come to it, back to it later. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again so much for being here. My name is Stacy Whitehouse. I'm the Associate Director of Communications here at Advance CTE, and we are very excited to share some research that has been going on for several years and have it out in the world. So we are going to cover a lot of ground today. Give me just one moment. We are having some issues with the screen sharing. So while we are working on some technical difficulties, we're going to start with a warm-up question. What is one thing that you all would like to change about how people perceive CTE? So if there's one thing you wish the public better understood about CTE, what would it be? All right, let's see some of the responses that are here. Yes, how many career areas, who it is for, lots of things that we are going to cover today. Yes, it is for all students. We can stop the pesky vo-tech vocabulary. Absolutely. Yes, college and career, y'all are absolutely on the right track. So we are going to cover all those concepts, and we know broadly how folks feel about CTE, but what is the data really telling us when we ask specific questions and provide specific options of how they feel about CTE? So that is some of the areas that we are going to cover today. We will go over the research findings. We will do a reaction panel with CTE leaders and learners, which I'm especially excited about. We're going to highlight some communication resources that Advance CTE has, particularly in the realm of recruitment and engaging partners with communications about CTE. And then we will definitely have time for your questions. So please submit those throughout our time together today. And you will see that there's an email in the chat that if you have any issues or don't get your question answered, you are welcome to email us afterwards, and we are more than happy to follow up. So you all gave lots of answers, which is wonderful. So I'm going to give a quick background of how we got involved with this work. We have actually been involved in communications research since 2016, and many of you may recall that we have done research with learners and families for quite a while, and that includes some messaging research. And so in 2023, we decided to do a pivot, especially because we knew some of the most trusted sources of how to get CTE information are adults. So how do we dive in and see what their perceptions are so we can develop some priorities of how to address their perceptions and thereby in turn positively influencing our young people to choose CTE and enroll in CTE more. So we have been doing that for the last 3 years. I've been involved in this work since 2020. I just celebrated my 5-year anniversary at Advance CTE this week. And so throughout my time here, I've written publications on our messaging research, and I've also supported states in how do they apply that messaging research in their own state and how they set up long-term structures on communications and engagement to help shift perceptions and help to increase enrollment for all student populations. So this work is very near and dear to my heart, and I hope that today, not only do we share the top level research, but that you walk away feeling good about how you can make it work for your context, because we do understand that every community and every state is a little bit different, and so everyone's going to have to apply this a little bit differently. All right. So to get kind of to the objectives of what we were hoping to get with this survey, we wanted to revisit questions that we asked during our learners and families research, so we didn't entirely recreate the wheel. So things about awareness of CTE, what messages work, funding support, we'd asked all that again, but just to a different audience. And then doing a deeper dive. You'll see some slides on here about variations by generation. We obviously didn't really go into that with parents or guardians in our previous research, and so we wanted to delve into that a little bit. And you will see there are definitely some trends that emerge, and we will talk a little bit about Generation Z and their perception specifically towards the end of the presentation. All right, so very quickly, I just wanted to share a research methodology. We did about 1,000 adults each time, and there's some subgroups within that of those that were parents, parents who had children with community college experience, and then obviously, similar to our past research, we are representative by key demographics across gender, race, socioeconomic graphs. Um, Jean, I am sorry about that for not seeing the slides. Um, Hopefully we are not seeing that for other folks. Um, but I will keep going. And if you are having trouble seeing the slides in the chat, please let me know. Um, Survey delivery, we did try to do this just before CTE month, so folks were not maybe influenced by other messages. And you will see some colors throughout the presentation. There is blue and red for what's called statistically significant differences between audiences. So that is a scientific term, obviously, and we want to note that because it reaches a level that is important, and you will see that throughout the presentation. All right, so diving into the work, our top lines, I'm going to go over 6 key themes. The first is about awareness. CTE still has a little brand recognition to get through, but there's growing awareness and very strong support for its brand. Bipartisan support for funding. Elements of CTE are a top priority, and we'll talk a little bit about interest. We'll talk about messaging and what topics are most important to adults, who CTE is seen for, which many of you mentioned in the chat. You kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of perceptions in that realm, but we'll really have some firm data on that. And then talk a little bit about Generation Z and their views about career education or their education priorities in general, and then how is that translated in the research. All right, another engagement opportunity. So before we get into the first finding, which CTE term do you think the public has the most familiarity with? And this can be, it does not have to be CTE itself, it can be any term. So if folks want to share in the chat. Hands-on is popular. That was not in this question, but we will get to that later. I see some of that. Workforce development, lots of different responses. That's great. All right, so we will talk about terminology. So first of all, good news, awareness of CTE is growing. So throughout this research, we asked, do you know a little bit? Do you know a lot? Do you know nothing about the specific term CTE? And so the good news is that it increased 10% over the 3 years, which is significant. We saw a 10% increase from 2023 to 2024. And luckily in 2025, it sustained itself at 45%. So that we're getting there. And the good news is that there's a lot of folks that have heard about it that aren't included in that 45% that we should be able to translate to knowing at least something about the option. So just want to highlight that there's definitely easy room for growth in that regard. We also, in terms of some encouraging growth, that there was several groups that rose above that 45%. So you will see that in the left corner. Um, so certain demographic groups, as well as Gen Z, which is encouraging, and then men and parents all rose above the 45%. So that also helped us identify perhaps what demographic or age groups we still need to raise awareness of CTE across, and showing that there's definitely room that we can get to 50 and beyond that number. So the room to grow is that, as many of you correctly identified, CTE is not the top term right now for our field. While we have grown, there are other terms that are higher in knowing a little or a lot. So you can see the chart here that vocational education is one of the highest ones, and then career centers is another one that rises higher on the list. So awareness still need to do some work in that regard. Getting back to the better news, those who know CTE have very favorable opinions and is growing even more favorable. And I say that as a huge shout out to the work that all of you do on the ground, as well as I think the increased profile of CTE more in the press and media and all of those things that if you know about CTE, you have a very high favorability of CTE. So you'll see 2023, it was at 75%. It has grown almost 10% during the time that we have been doing this research. That's awesome, Roger. Thanks so much for sharing about Missouri. I do remember that y'all did some research on that, so that is great, and we love when states do their own research in their own context. So you will see we are up to 84%. And so the even better news, there's not a lot of folks in the unfavorable category. So that key thing is to keep this growing. Folks, again, who probably know the term but may not know a lot about it in that neither favorable nor unfavorable category, getting more of them to that somewhat favorable or favorable category can be our growth point. But overall, very happy with where this number is. Dennis, I see your question in the chat. When they do the survey, the terms that you saw on the last slide are the terms that were written out. And I think we did career technical education specifically because CTE can mean multiple things to folks. So we're trying to discern if they know about career technical education specifically. So thanks for asking that question. All right. I also wanted to share that, again, since this isn't the first time that we have asked this question, we have gotten more information from not only adults, but from our previous learner and family research and also from employers. And so this trend that we found also extends to both of those groups. So you see that it is very high among learners and families and even higher among employers, which we know they're very important partners. So that says great things for us just in terms of opportunities for growth. All right, so finding number two, talking about funding for CTE. So we ask if they want more public funding for CTE, and more good news on this front that since we've been asking this question, despite perhaps the actual challenges of getting more funding in some environments, there is strong support for achieving more funding. So again, has grown 8 points during the 3 years that we've done this research. And the main thing I want to point out from this slide that it is highly supportive across political affiliation. So independents, Democrats, and Republicans all selected this option at 75% or above, and in some cases above 80%. So that from an advocacy perspective, both at the federal level and the state level, that is something that is very important to us. So lots of good news in terms of not only because of the reputation that we have of CTE, that is translating to people wanting more additional public funding to keep the expansion of these programs going. This also connects to what are the societal benefits of CTE. So not only do we have more funding, but what does it contribute to society as a whole? And you'll see here that several of the options that we shared about public education, about growing talent pipelines, that not only is there almost at or majority strong agreement, that then it goes to 80, almost 90% on agreement. So again, just reinforcing the work that you all do about reputation is noticed in the research, that folks, even though they may need to learn more about CTE, that those who know it are very invested in what it provides and think that there is a major benefit for it. All right, now we're going to shift a little bit to talking about CTE in connection to what do people think about what they want in education and how does it translate to interest in enrollment. So we asked the question, and we have asked this question of learners and families in the past, of how important are each of the following in your education? And so we have a list of options that we ask folks. And as you can see here, this is reinforced by previous research. We're very glad to see that key elements of CTE, gaining skills and exploring different careers, are at the top of the chart. What might be a little surprising to folks is that some of the other priorities that you'll see in red numbers is earning college credits and AP or IB classes. So showing that no matter where you are in your educational priorities, and y'all talked a lot in the chat about college and career, that people were seeing the CTE aspects rise to the top. And so what's important is how do we translate that as CTE providing those opportunities when they are a priority in education. So, in thinking about interest in CTE programs, we are in a good place, but there is room for growth, and it has been growing over the 3 years that we have done this research. So we asked this question soon after in terms of survey order, asking about priorities, and then asking, after hearing a description of CTE, would you be interested in enrolling your child in the program? And so we're at almost 50% of very interested or extremely interested. And I think the good news on this is you'll see somewhat is at 33. So again, that translation of almost 80% have at least some interest, and getting folks more of the very and extremely interested where they're more likely to enroll is the key kind of transfer point for us. I know some folks were asking in the chat about reasons for opposing or not supporting enrollment. And some of the notes that were provided, we have quotes for that, is some people said they needed to learn more about what CTE is and how the program is structured. Some said that they had a career that was not aligned to CTE, which speaks to what many of you said in the chat about helping folks show that it is almost every career possible is in CTE. So those were some of the responses. Not everybody had to leave a quantitative response or chose not to, but those were some of the choices that people gave as to, or that there were other priorities for their student at that time in education. Perhaps there are other opportunities they wanted them to participate in. So those were. Another was my child is still young. There were folks who said they prefer to attend a 4-year university after high school. So again, it was aligned to some of those perceptions that we're seeing and wanting to change. On the positive side, there was things about cost, allowing to learn skills that they might not otherwise get, will give direction on what career they want to pursue. So those are positives that came out when we asked folks why they want to enroll in the program. I also wanted to share, we often look at other research about what folks are saying about CTE enrollment and demand and all those other things. And so 50 Can did a research on a variety of topics related to education. One of their questions was about demand for CTE in terms of interest versus demand. And so you can see across a variety of population groups, there is a lot of demand and lower participation. So thinking about those messages and how it can translate to participation is key not only in our research, but in other research that is coming up with our partners. All right, so one of my favorite areas to look at is message testing because Advance CTE was one of the first to do message testing in regards to CTE, and more folks have gotten into that space. And so we've continued to evolve in what kind of messages we are testing. So we had quite a list of phrases that we chose to test. And we used a max diff analysis, which allows you to group the phrases into smaller groups so people can compare them multiple times rather than just pure ranking, because we really wanted to do comparison of messages similar to what people do in their everyday life, that they may see one message surrounded by other messages in multiple different places. And so that helps to simulate how someone digests information rather than seeing it once and having to rank. Um, so want to give folks a minute to look at the messages and going to ask the chat, which message do you think it was a top message? We are going to share what the three top messages were. We'd love to hear from folks which one you think might be the top one. I saw somebody ask about the in Texas, Dr. Q. That is not a nationwide course in CTE, but I love that that is in Texas. There's lots of different variations of how employability skills are embedded. And I think as more states continue to build out their middle school programs, we'll see more of things like that. But every state does that a little bit differently. Okay, build skills and connections, explore careers, hands-on learning. Nice. Love seeing the guesses. So it's right for you. Love that. Thanks so much for all the messages. So I will say next slide, we'll see some trends that have endured through our message testing, which we do like seeing because that just backs up previous research, but we also expect things to evolve. So I will share some what has evolved during our time as well. All right. So one that I saw a little bit of, but not a ton of, is the one on the left, which actually was the top message that came up in our research. And keep in mind that this is adults. And so we did expect that there be slightly different motivations, perhaps, than what showed up for our learners. But I will say that this financial security and independence has been rising for several years since COVID. And this is not only showed up in the research, but it's also showed up in our work with states that when we ask them to develop their own messages for recruitment about CTE and get feedback from learners, the financial piece has definitely become a bigger part of what people see as benefits from CTE or what their priorities are for their careers and life. And when we first started doing this research back in 2016, that was not the case. But we all know that the hiring and the cost of living and all of those things has greatly changed over the past few years, and folks are looking for more certainty in their education and in their career path. And so that is coming up in the messages. The other two boxes are more enduring messages. The building skills and hands-on learning has long been messages that resonate with our populations, and that continued to be the case here. And similar to what you all shared earlier in the presentation, like the hands-on learning, several of you said you thought that was the most popular terminology that people would know about CTE, and it is one of the most popular messages. So please keep emphasizing that. The other piece I want to just push is the connections piece. That first showed up in our research with learners in 2020 of that idea of social capital and building the networks and trying to find ways to further your career and being able to work with like-minded students and professionals that are passionate about the same thing that you are. And so the skills is something I think we talk a lot about, but the connections was also a piece that came up that I think is very unique to CTE. We know our CTSOs provide a lot of that as well. So just wanted to highlight that. Um, So somebody asked about the questions focused on CTE in middle school and high school. So we just asked about CTE as a term in general. We didn't differentiate between whether it was secondary or post-secondary. We were kind of testing it as a brand overall. So Oscar, thank you for asking that question. Okay. Um, One of the not too surprising findings, we all wish that we didn't see this, but um, obviously, again, based on what y'all shared at the beginning of the presentation, I don't think y'all will be too surprised by this. But one of the main areas for working on perceptions of CTE is that idea of CTE being for every learner at every age and stage of their career journey. And right now, there is a very big gap in who adults think CTE is for, and therefore influencing our young people on their decision making or making decisions for themselves if they need CTE as part of their education journey. So we asked the question of who do you think currently participates in CTE and gave this category, the about 10 categories you see here, and then who do you think should participate in CTE? It wasn't necessarily in this order. I just put this order in terms of the percentages in the left-hand column, so do want to make that clear. But what you all can see is some of the more historical perceptions around who CTE is, that it is more limited to secondary. For those who may not immediately go to post-secondary education, or they have the perception of what post-secondary education is maybe only being 4 year. Trade school, and we use terms that are more recognizable to the public, not necessarily terms that we would prefer to have be used, but trying to test when people hear that term, do they associate that with CTE and who they think should be participating based on who they identify as students identify with that group. Um, so you will see there is a very large gap, in some cases 40 points, and then 20 down to 25 points, which is still a very big gap, to students in post-secondary education, and students who maybe excel more in core academic classes. So there is still a lot of work that we want to do on how do we communicate clearly that not only is CTE for all students, but there are so many unique opportunities for students to jumpstart their post-secondary education, no matter what path that they are choosing, especially as we know that so many jobs do require some sort of post-secondary education, and um, that is not changing. So this is the one of the biggest findings that we had, because I think that we knew that this misconception was here, but we hadn't really had the data and the actual percentages to back that up. I think the good news about the currently versus should is that there is growth between the currently and the should. So people across the board think that more people should be in CTE than there currently are, and that is great. The other piece I want to highlight is our younger adults that took the survey. You'll see on the far right under the should variances. Gen Z and millennials were more likely to have higher percentages that felt that these populations should be participating in CTE. So we'll have to do some more digging into that. We really only got that data this year, but that is a good sign that perhaps younger adults have been able to pick up on some different perceptions and that it's reflected in the findings. So we were glad to see that. But again, this is the biggest finding and work that we need to be doing. I wanted to show this slide just to dig a little bit deeper about who should participate in CTE and what we're seeing across generations. So I'll talk a little bit about more Gen Z in a minute, but you'll see at the kind of the bottom row that there is variance across the generations of who they thought were less likely to say should participate in CTE. And I'm sure you can see the trends from boomers to our Gen Z folks, that the college and 4 year showed up higher in younger adults, and then was less likely to show up by a significant margin, statistically significant margin, in the research. So I'll give everyone a minute to take a look at that. Someone asked in chat about Gen Alpha. We haven't started that. We haven't done that research yet, but if anybody does know research that's being done or you're thinking about doing in your state, please feel free to. And somebody asked about the, Marshall, you were asking about the methodology. So just to reiterate, this is adults. Most of the folks who answered this survey did not currently have a student in school. There was a portion of the adults that were parents, and then a smaller portion of adults who's had children with community college experience. So there's a couple places where I've noted that, but overall, this was about adults generally, not just parents, because we had done the parents research before, but obviously there's lots of adults in people's lives who are sources of information, regardless of if they have children or guardian to a child themselves. Great questions. All right, so the final piece I want to highlight and then get into our panel is how Generation Z, you saw a little bit of a spoiler in the last slide about Generation Z perceptions in the survey. This is research that other folks have done about educational priorities. So we've talked about the hand-on learning. We've talked about there's hands-on, you'll see that in several places. But there's also been research showing that Gen Z is more open to a variety of post-secondary options, but they still do not have enough information about those post-secondary options beyond a four-year degree. So you'll see some numbers here. About 63% know about a bachelor's degree, but 20 points less than that know about a certificate or an internship. So I wanted to show this slide because on its surface, we're still continuing to learn about Gen Z, but there are a lot of things that they are looking for in education that align with what CTE has to offer. So sharing a little bit about how this showed up in our research. On the good news side, they were much more likely to be aware of CTE than the national average, which was great. More likely to have a broader understanding of who CTE should be for. Not by much, it's still in the 20s, but that is encouraging growth. They were less likely to have high favorability levels than the national average. So you may remember that 80% number. 50% of that 80% number was very favorable, which is awesome. But Gen Z was a little bit lower than that. And we don't have direct answers for that. There's a lot of probably not causality, but correlation we could draw. Obviously, impacts on the pandemic and perhaps their exposure to CTE. There's multiple research showing that Gen Z is a bit more skeptical of institutions in general. And so while there may be, as you can see, probably more interest and awareness, that commitment may not be there. And so that's especially important for us to communicate specifically how it benefits them and aligns with their interest. And then kind of extending to that skeptical, they had slightly lower levels of believing that CTE would deliver on certain benefits like life skills, emerging skills. Overall, that benefits of CTE level was pretty high, but when you compare with other generations, they were slightly lower. So again, reinforcing that our messages to Gen Z really have to show data and storytelling and our alumni and employers, and really showing the proof of how CTE is delivering on what we are doing. So then that favorability can rise and folks are more likely to connect the benefits with what they are seeing in communications. All right, so I know we have gone through a lot. So I would love to have folks share in the chat what is one thing that stood out to you about the findings. And while you were doing that, Katie, you asked, yes, there is. I will say this is very anecdotal, but I will notice I think that there's been more coverage and alerts and things that have come up for me about career technical education, that term, than the other term in the last year, but there is sometimes confusion with that. Oh, the variation from Gen Z to baby boomers. I like that. Awesome. Well, I will have folks continue to share in the chat what stood out to them. And I we'll bring our panelists on in a second, but I'm very glad that we have a variety of state leaders that I've had the pleasure to work with, and two CTSO leaders who were in CTSOs in high school and are now college students and are also still involved in that level. And so not only did I want to share research, but wanted to get some reactions from those who are directly served by or serve others in CTE and just have a larger conversation of what is the future of perceptions, what is happening on the ground to help shift those perceptions, and all of these folks have done work in that regard. And so I am going to bring on our wonderful panelists if they can come on video, and we will get started on our panel. Thank y'all so much for being here. I know in particular, Jessica and Cadence are at a conference and sitting right beside each other today. So that is wonderful that y'all are deep in the work and taking time to be here. So first, I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourself briefly and share what makes you passionate about CTE. So Jessica would love to start with you, and then we'll go Ovia, Cadence, and Quentin.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. My name is Jessica Duvall. I am the Business Education Supervisor with the North Dakota Department of Career and Technical Education, and with that, the state chair for all three divisions of the North Dakota FBLA, and previously was a high school teacher for 10 years. Oh, I'm sorry, you wanted passion about CTE. I forgot the second half of the question. So CTE was the place where I found my home in high school. And so it was important to me to have a career that was able to share that passion with other students along the way, and helping the youth of my state in particular, but the nation as a whole when possible.
Hello, my name is Ovia Senthal. I'm a second-year computer engineering major at the University of California, San Diego right now, and I served as the former national and state president for Skills USA California. And one thing that I'm really passionate about for CTE, I think is, like Jessica said, it really is a home for a lot of students. Besides that, I think it builds skills that are taught beyond a traditional classroom. It gives students the opportunities to become confident in what they want to do, confident in a career, and build that passion for hands-on learning within whatever pathway they want to do. And as a CTE student myself, who's built so much confidence and passion for what I love doing, as well as watching all my peers grow in their pathways, I think it holds a special place in my heart.
Cadence, I think Jessica might need to unmute.
Hi, I'm Cadence Haas. I am currently a junior at University of North Dakota, and I am currently a vice president on the collegiate level. And then I was also formerly the National Mountain Plains vice president for FBLA my senior year of high school. And for me, CTE really transformed me. I'm a byproduct of what CTE can do for a student. When I was a when I was a sixth grader, excuse me, I had to give a book report in front of my class of literally 12 people who I've been with my entire life. And I cried. I could not stand up and give a book report in front of them. And now I've gone and I've talked to at our national conference, we had over 16,000 members, and I got on stage and I talked to them with confidence. Obviously, I was nervous, but wouldn't anyone be nervous for that? But I was excited and I felt passionate about it. And so CTE has really helped me find my passion. Not only did it transform me in that way, but it also helped me find my career. I had no clue what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to college, if I wanted to get a job straight out of high school. And it was a really great pathway for me to find my career. And it's really set me up for success. I've learned all of my skills, I think FBLA for all of them. And I also thank it to my great advisors that I had in FBLA for really pushing me and making me get involved in FBLA because they saw a potential that I didn't see in myself at the time. So CTE and CTS, I was just hold a very strong place in my heart as it's literally changed my life for me.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Quentin Kelly. I am the Skills USA Post-Secondary State Director here in Louisiana. Um, my passion for CTE, it started before I even knew. I served in the military for 10 years, and after doing that and coming to education, I realized I consider myself to be a product of CTE. And ever since I came into higher education, it's been my passion, and I've been pushing it not only to other service members, to students that I come across as well.
Wonderful. I love hearing the different journeys, and the community and the passion is all very much tied, as well as the skills to transcend any career. I feel are things that all kind of elevated itself and was reflected into the research. So speaking of the research, let's kind of dive into that first. Would love to have a couple of you share. Was there a finding that really resonated with you, either something you were surprised by or something that really reflected your experience in CTE?
So I saw it come up a few times in the chat as well while you were presenting, Stacy, and that finding about financial independence being important. I think that's definitely something that we see have a higher priority for parents and students as we see different shifts in the economics of our country, and what's happening, because we definitely want our students to be independent, right? We want them to graduate and be able to find jobs and pay for housing and do all of those things. And so I think it's really important that we see that. And in North Dakota in particular, we see a lot of focus put on our in-demand occupations documents that our job service puts out, and finding some importance for that with our students.
Take one more reaction.
One of the findings that stood out to me was when you spoke about the perceptions of CTE, especially in Louisiana. After speaking with several students and doing some focus groups, we learned that CTE was considered as a backup plan, and universities in 4 years were considered more of a priority. So seeing the data that was shared and some of the perceptions that they have, it's very puzzling to say we come a long way, but we still have a little ways to go.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, well, kind of building on what you were saying about perceptions, and obviously the research shows that CTE has a strong reputation for those that know about it, but it's still struggling to break through as a brand. And so I'd love to hear why you think that is, and maybe what you recommend to address that, what you've been doing. And Ovia, would love to start with you because I know that you all you had done some work during your time as a student, kind of addressing stigmas even within your own CTSO.
Yeah, I think a lot of stigma around CTE programs comes from language and previous beliefs that people have regarding programs. Like, for example, at my high school, manufacturing and computer science were kind of separated, even though they were both CTE programs. And we had a very big engineering focus and focus less on other things. And I think a big idea slash concept that we want to move away from is the idea that if you're in a CTE, it's almost like an extracurricular class, something that you're doing because you don't have any other classes to take. And so a lot of our training in my CTSO involved using specific languages and explaining benefits to people that kind of ended up being buried in the background in the overall image people already had about programs. So we focused on vocabulary within the framework, like career ready, technical excellence, job skills, and employability skills when advocating for CTE and CTE programs. And we were also encouraged a lot to share personal stories and encourage students to share their stories when they spoke about their CTE programs, which helped kind of shape the idea that we're helping students become skilled professionals and future leaders and whatnot within their CTE pathways.
All right, I'm going to go to the next question. And Cadence, I know that you kind of shared a little bit of work about this. So I'd like to dive a little bit into the learner perspective. And did you feel that the findings kind of aligned with perhaps what you're hearing from learners, or in what ways that they are different, and kind of what's been your experience? And I know you were from a smaller school and smaller community, but that's an awesome kind of reflection of what's done in different types of communities of how to improve perceptions of CTE.
In our school, CTE is directly correlated with CTSOs. Everyone thinks that CTE and CTSOs are the same thing, and they view CTSOs as just extracurriculars such as like FBLA, etc. And they think that, in our school personally, thinks that if you are in a CTSO like FBLA, FFA, HOSA, Skills USA, you're going to college, which is interesting because that like counteracts a lot of the data. Is they don't realize that CTE is not necessarily for college students, but it actually, I disagree. I think it's for all students. I think everyone should be in CTE classes because that's what your first look at hands-on classes are from the CTE classes. Those are what preps you to go onward. In our school, it was just like a weird opposite effect. And so we combated this by targeting students directly. Like I said, I graduated with 12 students, including myself. So we were completely, like, we were way smaller. So what we did was we looked at a list of students from each class, and we sat down and said, okay, so and so is not an FBLA. We should talk to them about this and get them into FBLA and CTE classes, even if it's just as like, for example, we know so and so is interested in accounting, like going into accounting. We would go and we'd find them and we'd talk to them one on one. And it's really great if you can make some kind of personal connection with them. If it's like, oh, I know you're interested in accounting, it immediately like makes them think that you know about them. And so we would make those connections with them, and we would just sit down and be like, have you thought about joining FBLA? Like, and it's more than just business. It actually can teach you how to interview for a job, how to, there's like agribusiness if you're into like farming and things like that. It showed that business isn't everything. And so it was really great to make that connection because a lot of people just listen to the stigma around it. And so to combat that, we just had honest and open conversations with them, and it was basically like kind of like you're wrong in a sense. We just kind of like let them know like this is actually what it is. And we saw a great increase in membership, but also a great increase in people taking our classes, our CTE classes, because they realize that, oh, maybe gym class, though gym class is great for health and stuff, isn't going to get me a job in the future. Maybe I actually should be invested in these CTE classes that are going to set me up for success in the future. So that was one way our school combated that.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And what resonated with me about both of you, Ovia and Cadence, was just the need to provide specifics to students about that this is for so many different more types of careers than what they may be hearing otherwise, and that can be applied to so many different paths. Jessica, I wanted you to share real quick. I think you mentioned that what types of training that would you either like to do or have done in the past to kind of help on the adult side of things with educators, school counselors, those folks to communicate about CTE?
Yeah. So I think a couple of ways that we try to do that in North Dakota. Specifically, we take the ACTE Career Month, CTE Month materials and do some customizing to those and help our schools put together some promo packages and some templates that they can use in their communities to make that awareness piece be a collaborative approach. We also have a CTE conference that we do in the summer and try to make part of that conference tools that districts can use to share information about CTE in their communities as well, whether that's part of their registration process and all year long. But much like our former national officers have shared, the CTSO piece we find to be really that visible part in communities. And so while we know they're learning great skills in the classroom, I always tell advisors that the CTSO, that student organization, is really the most visible piece of what they're doing and really allows the students to demonstrate those skills that they're learning in the classroom. So in conjunction with CTE month, really important to support the awareness of those CTSO weeks. While we know a bunch of them fall in February, there are some other ones along the rest of the calendar year, and making that a possibility. And I think as often as possible, we try to encourage our districts and our student organizations to work together. I know we have one district that does an FBLA and FCCLA work together to do a 5K color run. And they focus on their skills, right? The FBLA students are handling registration and collecting money and doing those pieces, and the FCCLA students are helping with setting up the course and putting together the color throwing packages or whatever those are. And so really taking that opportunity to show them that the student organizations have a lot in common. The focus maybe is just different in their content specialties.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I love that you reinforce that, of course, there's a lot of attention around CTE month, but like increasing perceptions and raising awareness does require all year long promotion. So taking advantage of the CTSO weeks or weeks that align with like November is there's going to be apprenticeship week, there's National Career Development Month. So additional opportunities and throughout the recruitment period, I know for a lot of folks, the main recruitment period for programs is starting right now. So thinking of promotion as a year-long endeavor, and not just February, even though we love all the celebrations that happen in February, is like a huge point. Um, Quentin, want to pivot to you because I had the privilege of working with you and the Louisiana team as part of our cohort on improving recruitment structures within CTE. And you had the opportunity and led focus groups and resource development with dual enrollment and post-secondary students and learned a lot of things about what they think about CTE. And I know you've shared a little bit about that. But can you share a little bit more about what exactly you learned from those focus groups and how that impacted how you made materials for recruitment or gave guidance to others about resource development?
Yeah, so what we did, we worked with two different colleges locally in Louisiana. From there, we worked with Trio Upper Bound, Trio EOC, dual enrollment students and post-secondary students, as you mentioned. And we conducted some surveys, and from the surveys, we pulled information. And let me back up a little. With the surveys, we worked with students on their input on what to ask and how to ask it, because we noticed there was some information we were speaking at a level where they may not be able to interpret or resonate. So we had to back up and work with them. But in the focus groups and the surveys, we learned that students are willing to do the work to see the changes and results that they want. A lot of times we want to not include the students or think that they don't want to do it, but they want to see results. So we definitely need to start including them. Another thing we learned that secondary students in rural areas, let me see, for lack of better words, they don't necessarily trust their teachers and guidance counselors. We learned that in those smaller rural areas, everyone is very close, and what they thought would stay confidential between them and their teachers and guidance counselors, it was getting out, and people in the community was finding out, and sometimes the information wasn't accurate. So it stirred up a lot of confusion. So they started doing more research on their own. Another thing we learned is social media presence is vital. They're constantly going to social media, checking it. They rather see the advertisements from there versus paper. And a lot of institutions have to kind of get away from that, but they want to see it on social media. And flyers, even when they're doing recruitment and career exploration, a lot of times the flyers that are still being used, students are walking past them. And that's for two reasons. One is because the themes that are on the flyers aren't resonating with the students, and the color schemes are not resonating with the students to make them stop and even see what the information is. So that's something that has to be constantly changed and updated in order to keep meeting students where they are and getting the information that resonates with them. Uh, Based off of the feedback that we received from them, we came up with the acronym REFER, which is recognize the need for learner input, engage learners meaningfully and through multiple avenues, fund opportunities for learners to engage and incentivize, eliminate barriers to students' engagement, and provide training resources and support to students, and respond to learners' recommendations. You don't want to just get their recommendations and okay, going one ear and out the other. So that's very critical. And one last thing, just to share an example of what we did here, we got together, the staff at our system office created a video or a couple of videos for students in CTE career paths in manufacturing, welding, automotive, and we got it. We thought it was amazing, and we shared it with some students to get their feedback, and they didn't like it. It didn't resonate with them. So that was a huge learning curve for us to include them on the front end instead of the back end. That would have saved us a lot of time and a lot of money.
Quinn, thank you so much for sharing. And that was very valuable just to hear all those things in the response. And yeah, so learner input along the way, and especially at the beginning. And I think one thing that comes through that all of you have said, from the social media to who are the trusted sources to one-on-one conversations, is that it's an all-encompassing approach, that there's not just one strategy that works, that people have to see it in multiple places and see the messages that matter to them in order to like have it really resonate and then translate to actual enrollment. So I know that we are running out of time, but Ovia and Cadence in particular, any last advice that you would like to give to our folks on the webinar of something to keep in mind when it comes to perceptions or messaging CTE? Cadence, I'll go with you first.
CTE is a really great thing, and I honestly think something to keep in mind is it's not that people are against CTE or have a negative connotation of CTE. It's that they just don't know what it is and they don't understand it. Being patient and in providing the resources and showing people what it is, I think is going to be the most helpful thing. Another thing to remember is that people think that students, especially our age, aren't interested in this kind of thing, but we are. We are looking for this stuff and we want it. We just not be able to find it. Sometimes it's just comes down to the school doesn't distribute it well, unfortunately, as much as they do try. And we just need that extra reinforcement from the teachers and the educators to let us know what it is. If it wasn't for my business teacher, I would have no clue what a CTE or a CTSO is. It came from her more than it came from the school. So we have to keep in mind that a lot of information is being spread from teachers and that teachers are the key source to getting to the students. So providing them with correct resources is going to be really big in providing it to the students because the students want CTE. They want to know more and they want to learn and they want to help and improve. They just might not have the resources yet. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cadence. Ovia, any last words?
Yeah, no, that was beautifully said by Cadence, first of all. But kind of building off of that, I think the funniest things I experience is when a student who's the most involved in CTE I've ever seen asks me about CTE. And it's just the same concept that students don't understand or know what CTE is, but are interested in learning and are interested in professional development and being successful. And I think one of the biggest things is just being present, being there as an aid to help spread resources, help students get connected to resources, and help them understand that CTE is there to help them be successful, help them be career ready, and everything they want is in CTE. And I think sometimes just the knowledge of CTE is kind of hidden in the overall message, but being there as a mentor and a guide to resources is definitely very important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all four of you for your time today, for the insights you provided, and most importantly, all that you are doing to help raise awareness of CTE. Truly appreciated. Thank y'all so much. Finally, I'm just going to reshare really quick my screen. We will have to go through this very quickly, but I know there were questions in the Q&A. I try to answer as many questions in the chat as possible throughout our webinar, but while our final poll is being launched, just some future application. Would love to see other states and communities replicate this, whether it's doing a full-on survey or thinking about how you can do focus groups or surveys with learners and adults about perceptions. Ways to incorporate these findings into federal and state advocacy. We will be sharing some additional resources like graphics and fact sheets about this to help you in that regard. And then creating things with your own messages once you do testing for release and state use of just continuing to evaluate your own perception materials, thinking about whether those messages we share can be incorporated into your resources while you're doing your own testing, of just having a consistent national narrative about CTE is definitely important. So you'll see that there was a link in the chat to some recruitment materials. So we have templates and other things that now that enrollment season is coming up and a huge communications opportunity, would love to have everyone sharing it out, and it's very quick and easy, ready-made templates to help you all with all the great things that you are doing. So we will share contact information. There was some LinkedIns that were put in earlier in the webinar, but we can include those links in the follow-up email, because if you registered, you will get an email with the recording. And so here is my contact information if you would like to get in touch with me as well. But again, thank you all very much for your time and attention. I know it's a lot of information, but I hope it was useful. And to our panelists for sharing their on-the-ground insights, and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.
We will keep the poll open for a little bit so you can make sure that you fill it out before you leave.